Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm talking about The Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, a series that ran from 1973 to 1983, 111 issues, 4 giant size, and 1 annual. In the early 70s, Hong Kong started exporting kung fu films dubbed into English into the North American market. They usually featured a sort of a minority figure who was struggling to make his way in the world, and he was beset by prejudice, racism, social inequality, social injustice, and that sort of character, that protagonist, that hero, struck a chord with a lot of the young American and North American audience. So they took to the kung fu hero, and the thing about a kung fu hero is that he didn't have a great deal of money behind him. He didn't have like a great weapon cache. It was his own skills and his own determination that saw him through these things and tackling, fearsome opponents that had a lot of money or political backing behind it. So the idea of this guy struggling against all of this against the odds against him, sort of a David and Goliath type of story, it resonated a great deal with the young public of North America in the 70s. So it became, as I say, in 1971 was the Fists of Fury with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee became sort of the poster child for kung fu films. Although, to be truthful, Hong Kong was making Hong Kong films as early, or kung fu films as early as 1938. But still, over in North America, they really started to take off into the 70s. And as I say, Bruce Lee became somewhat of the poster child for the kung fu movement but in 1972, Warner Brothers capitalized on that and they released a TV show called Kung Fu, which featured David Carradine as a Shaolin monk named Kane, who the story was basically, he would wander about, and all those things I just talked about, the lone figure who had to deal with racism and prejudice and social injustice and inequality against stronger foes. That's pretty much what Kung Fu was about. A little bit of the stranger in a strange land because he was only part Asian, part American. So he was a little bit of a stranger in strange land because he spent so much time in the monastery, and he was treated differently just because of the way he dressed, his mannerism, his Eastern philosophy, and that again appealed to people, and a lot of people watched Kung Fu. So we're getting to the in 1972, as I say, when the series was released, and something about the creative talent working both at Marvel and DC at the time is that they often saw each other outside of work. They would go and grab a bite to eat together. There was a friendly rivalry, a baseball rivalry between the DC staff and Marvel staff. So they annually got together and did a baseball game. There were people that lived in the same flat. There were people that lived very close to one another and saw each other in the same areas. So it came to be that Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin were over at their friend Steve Harper's place, and they were about to go out for a bite to eat. And Steve Harper says, "Well, we can't go just yet because I have to watch my show, Kung Fu." Something that a younger audience may not understand, that back in '70s, until we got even to the videos and certainly now with streaming, when a show came on at a specific time during the week, that was your one chance to watch that show. If the show came on at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday and you were away, you didn't get to see that show. I won't say ever, because in the summers you might get a chance to catch the rerun of it to watch that hour. But for the most part, when it debuted, that was your one best shot at seeing that particular episode. And if you missed it, you couldn't go back, you couldn't tape it, you couldn't rewind it. It was there that 1 hour. And people built their schedules around their favorite shows. Not entirely around their favorite shows, but if something was happening, say on Tuesday at 8 o'clock, and that's when your favorite show was, and they said, "Hey, let's get together and do this," the refrain would be, "Well, can we put it off until Wednesday? Could we go a day earlier on Monday? Could we do it after 9 or whatever the thing is, because I have to watch my show." And some people would be, "Well, how show is that much more important than doing this sort of stuff?" But a lot of people would also say, "Ah, I understand. That's when your show is, so we'll do it another time." As it came to be, so Steve Englehart, Jim Starlin, Steve Harper. They're about to go out for dinner. Steve Harper says, "You know what? Can't go because I got to watch my show, Kung Fu." And Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin saying, all right, all right. Well, we'll stick around. We'll watch the show, and then we'll go get a bite to eat." Well, what do you know? They like the show Kung Fu, and this is only about the second or third episode, and so they get not necessarily hooked right away, but they're really intrigued by the show, and they want to take a look at the show, and they talk a little bit more and think that maybe we can adapt the show Kung Fu to a comic book. Kung Fu is owned by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers owns DC, and DC is not interested in doing a Kung Fu book. They figure it's a flash in the pan, and let's not be done with it. Although I don't quite understand that if that's actually the reasoning, because even if it was a flash in the pan, you could make X amount of dollars on that by selling, because the whole boom of the Kung Fu stuff was really amping up. So this would have been a good time. Anyways, Jim Starlin and Steve Englehart, they're over at Roy Thomas's place, or they're with Roy Thomas, and they say, "Hey, you got to watch this show Kung Fu." So they do watch the show Kung Fu with Roy Thomas, who's whatever, it's okay. And Jim Starlin, Steve Englehart say, "Hey, we would like to do a show, a Kung Fu type of show. So not this because we can't, because that's Warner Brothers DC, but we'd like to create a character and sort of explore this whole Kung Fu theme." And Roy Thomas says, "Yes, you can do that, but you have to include Fu Manchu, because we've just got the rights to Fu Manchu, and I would like to see Fu Manchu in comic books." Roy Thomas always has favored characters of the past: Doc Savage, Fu Manchu, even the stuff from Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan. Roy Thomas was paramount in bringing Conan to the forefront over at Marvel. So yeah, so he liked these pulp heroes, these older heroes. So you can do your Kung Fu, show me a proposal of it, but it's got to include Fu Manchu. And Jim Starlin, Stevie Englehart say, "Okay, we'll do that." And then they come up with this creation here, Hands of Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu, appearing first in issue number 15 of the Special Marvel Edition. So the idea of this story is that Shang-Chi is Fu Manchu's son. And Fu Manchu has convinced him and has raised him to be the best fighter that he can be, also, but to be, an assassin. And tell Shang-Chi that I, Fu Manchu, I'm the nicest man on the planet, and I want the best things for the world. I want to see a wonderful world where people live in peace and harmony. And he teaches his son, like some of the Eastern philosophy and what have you. But there are people out there that want to stop me, they don't see that dream, that they're evil people that need to be put down so that my dream can become a reality. And so Shang-Chi, "Oh well, yeah, whatever you say, Dad, that's what's going to happen." So he sends Fu Manchu sends Shang-Chi out into the world. First time that he's actually gone sort of beyond the compound of Fu Manchu and beyond the borders of China at all. And he's sent to England to assassinate Dr. Petrie. I will mention Dr. Petrie and Dennis Nayland Smith are also Sax Rohmer characters, of which Fu Manchu is from. That's where they got the license from. So he's sent to England and to assassinate Dr. Petrie. And you know what? He does. He kills Dr. Petrie. And while he's there, he runs into Sir Dennis Nayland Smith. And through some of the words and dialogues, Dennis Nayland Smith's calling him a murderer and all this sort of stuff. They start to get to talking about who's right and wrong, and the evil that, Nayland Smith is doing and the good that Fu Manchu is doing. And Nayland Smith says, "Are you sure? I think you get your wires crossed, because it's the other way around. Fu Manchu is trying to dominate and control the world, and we're trying to stop him." So now Shang-Chi's a little bit confused about the whole situation and says, "Is there a truth to that? Have I been misled all my life? I'm unsure now." And he does some investigating and talks to his mother, of all people, and it gets to the point where he says, "Oh, I have been lied to. Fu Manchu does want to, take over the world. He does want to have a controlling interest. All these people that are trying to stop him, Fu Manchu cares very little about the human condition, very little about human lives. He cares about his own life, his own success, his own power. That's what he's interested. He's not interested in the common man or the good of the common man." So they become at odds. Fu Manchu disowns Shang-Chi, and he's left to wander the world on his own outside of the compound in this new world, a stranger in a strange land. So he has Fu Manchu wanting to end his life with his sci-fi assassins, and he's also, accused of murder, and he is being sought after by various police forces as well. So this is the premise, and this is where we start with the Master of Kung Fu, issue number 15. A couple of things about this book as far as, spec, investment, and all that sort of stuff. This is the first appearance of Shang-Chi. And it's not an expensive book. This copy here, which is probably about a 5.5, a 6, something around there, maybe a little bit higher, but we'll go with 6, is about $150 raw. And for me, when I look at this as at a 70s a premier, well, it's not an A-list character, but it's certainly a character that fits in there with like Luke Cage, which is also from the 70s. I mean, you take a look at the 70s heroes that were introduced, and you get Ghost Rider and Moon Knight and Luke Cage and Nova and Iron Fist. But Shang-Chi is, they've already made a film of him. He showed up in a number of different books. He's still still a character that's relevant within the Marvel Universe, and you can get his first appearance for a very low price. So we have this first appearance here, as I say, from Special Marvel Edition number 15. Special Marvel Edition, it started off from issues 1 through 14 as being reprint books. The first 4 issues, might have been 5, but featured reprints of Thor, and then from about issue number 5 to 14, they were reprints of Sergeant Fury. That's what happened, and then, as I say, with issue number 15, they change it over to the Master of Kung Fu, as I say, written by Steve Englehart and illustrated by Jim Starlin. So we have Shang-Chi wandering around the world type of thing, and that goes on. There's just one more issue that is listed under the Special Marvel Edition, and this is the first appearance of a character called Midnight. No big deal. He trained with Shang-Chi. He was of the same age. They came up together, but they're now at opposing viewpoints and what have you. So that's but with issue number 17, we changed the title of it from Special Marvel Edition to Master of Kung Fu, and it runs this from 17 to 125. 17 is also the introduction of a character called Black Jack Tar, and he works for MI6, which is a military. What do they call themselves? The military, something rather from the UK. An investigation squad, MI6, Section 6. And that's headed by, this particular division is headed by Sir Dennis Nayland Smith, who, as I say, is a character of Sax Rohmer's as well. So he was imported with a Fu Manchu. Blackjack Tar, brand new character, as is, as I said, Shang-Chi. So they mix it up, and for a lot of these stories, it's Shang-Chi versus the sci-fi assassins of Fu Manchu, or those that work with him to try and attack Shang-Chi, or sometimes it's elements of the British intelligence that is seeking out to capture Shang-Chi as well. So and mixed into this is a great deal of Eastern philosophy about harmonized world. And it can be fun watching. I do find a good writer, and Steve Englehart is a good writer. Mixing the whole idea of the stranger in a strange land, it can really pay off. So issue number 17, we changed to Master of Kung Fu. Now, as far Jim Starlin does not stay on the book very long. That was it. That was the last one he was on the book, and moved on to other things. And there was a handful of different artists over the next number of books. This is the first Paul Gulacy book. Now, I call it Gulacy. I'm looking. I mean, there's a place that says Gulacy, and I always knew it as Gulacy, so I was confused. I can't find a definite, unless I get to an interview where Paul Gulacy says, "Hey, my name is Paul Gulacy." I'm going to stick with Gulacy for now, because that's how I remember it from when I was a young person. But if it changes, and my apologies if it's Gulacy. But anyways, this is his first work here, and I really enjoy his artwork, and it gets better and better. And he does a fair amount of work on the Master of Kung Fu, but I'll get a little bit more into that. In the meantime, this is the first piece that he does of Master of Kung Fu. He's a very young artist. He's 19, 20 when he's starting to do all of this sort of stuff. But he works at a slower pace than a lot of artists. Again, I'll get into that a little bit more. So there was a bunch of different artists that worked on Master of Kung Fu over a period of time. You got Al Milgrom, you got Keith Pollard, John Buscema did some, Gil Kane did some of the covers, but this is the first of the Paul Gulacy material. Gotta say, I really liked issue issue number 19 because it featured the Man Thing. And you have this great Gil Kane cover. You talk about a couple of oddball characters. I mean, this is the beginning of both the Man Things series just started a couple of years ago, as did Shang-Chi, and having these two characters mix it up was kind of interesting. I do like, as you can see in the cover, his foot goes right through him, and there's a scene in there where he tries to break the hold of Man Thing and use it, force and kick his way, spring off of the Man Thing, but unfortunately his feet go right through the Man Thing, and it's kind of an interesting thing. I do like this cover, and I do like this story. And again, just being a big fan of the Man Thing, so this really worked for me. I will say though that around this time, they also, a lot of Kung Fu craze was really high because 1973 saw the release of a film called Enter the Dragon, and if you haven't seen the film Enter the Dragon, I suggest you do. It still holds up today. It's like the premier Kung Fu film featuring Bruce Lee, Jim Kelly, John Saxon. An excellent film from Warner Brothers. The film itself in rentals and sales over its lifetime has brought in, over $2 billion. There's an estimate that goes even higher than that, but I think that includes ancillary things like posters. The Bruce Lee poster of him standing there was one of the best sellers throughout the entire 70s, and you'll see him on lunchboxes, on T-shirts. Unfortunately, Bruce Lee didn't get a chance to see all of this success because he died 2 weeks before the film's release. But it became like the pinnacle and the peak of the whole Kung Fu craze. And a number of books carried on. As I say, The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu it was a magazine, and it featured a bunch of different Kung Fu characters. Sons of the Tiger, the White Tiger here. Now, this is not the first appearance of the White Tiger. That happened in issue number 19. This is issue number 22, and it features the first appearance of Jack of Hearts. But the magazine itself, I think, ran for about like 34 issues. So the whole Kung Fu thing was fairly big in the early 70s. DC finally caught on board about a year after Marvel and released Richard Dragon and then the Karate Kid. But the flavor of the month of sort of thing of the Kung Fu had started to wane by that point in time. Iron Fist came out, but even his series was short-lived. It was just the Master of Kung Fu series that continued on. Alrighty. I just want to take a look at this one here. So, beginning with issue number 21, I don't have that one here. I do have it, I just don't have it on this way. But beginning with issue number 21, Doug Moench took over the writing chores. And Doug Moench, I like what he had to do, and I like what he has to say about his books later on. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But he seemed to be really getting a good grasp of the character. He said, I don't want this just to be a throwaway character where he's just fighting off different assassins every issue. And that's how it plays out for a number of issues. Just people, but there's enough interest in the way that Doug Moench writes it and writes the character of Shang-Chi and the other surrounding characters that makes the entire thing very interesting. This is the first appearance of the daughter of Fu Manchu. Again, another character of Sax Rohmer. So those were the four characters that were sort of imported from Sax Rohmer's book. Fu Manchu, Dr. Petrie, Dennis Nathan Smith, and Follow See, the daughter of Fu Manchu. I will point out, though, that at this point, Giant Size Master of Kung Fu #3 has been released. And in that particular story, it's revealed that Dr. Petrie survived the assassination attempt. So he's no longer, Shang-Chi is no longer, uh, pursued by the English government or any other governments. He's just pursued by his father who wants to kill him. But things change in issue #29. Because Doug Moench is looking at this and he says, I don't want it to be just a book where from issue to issue Shang-Chi has to dodge bullets of, well, not bullets, but you know what I'm saying, of these various assassins, Sci-Fan assassins set out by his father. I don't want to do a book that's just like that. It becomes very repetitive. So he decided to introduce an element of espionage into the book. It became a cross between a kung fu film and a James Bond film, uh, and that change was really beneficial for the book. And moving forward, I think we have some of the best stories that were written in the 70s, the best Master of Kung Fu stories, yes. And then there's an 8-block story in there that I consider one of the best stories of the 70s. And it's this mix of Kung Fu, of espionage. There's a bit of a love triangle thing happening in there. And the Paul Gulacy artwork that starts to, be on more and more issues is just excellent. He's like one of my favorite artists. He never wanted to be a comic book artist. He thought he was going to be like an illustrator, a painter, and what have you. And he sort of not necessarily fell into this because he did offer up some samples and what have you. But he got the gig to do Master of Kung Fu, and he worked on it for a number of years. By the end of his time working on Master of Kung Fu, he says, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this monthly book because was very, a slower artist because he's very meticulous and has got a great deal of detail and character into his panels and into their faces and expressions. He modeled a lot of his characters after cinema heroes. Clive Reston was modeled after Sean Connery. Agent Larner has got a little bit of that Marlon Brando look to it. So yeah, he uses these characters as a template. Even Shang-Chi at times has a posing of Bruce Lee, and he studied some of the films and whatever to get the action movements of the characters correct. His friend, and again, as I say, they're all friends. Val Mayer was studying karate very near, and Paul Gulacy would go and just study and watch the whole exercise thing happening there, so they get an idea of the movements necessary to make some of these movements happen in the kung fu. He's a very dedicated artist. But as I say, he's very slow, meticulous, and after a couple of years, he says, I can't do this anymore. I'm like hunched over my desk, illustrating, and it's hurt my back and hurt my mind. The reason you don't see any Paul Gulacy covers during this particular run is because he never had the time. It was just like under the wire that he would get all of the book done. And in fact, there are a number of fill-in issues, even from issue #29 to 51, which is the bulk of the Gulacy material. But there's a couple of fill-in issues in there because he couldn't finish in time. So there was some of these fill-in issues. Anyway, so this is where this whole espionage kung fu thing starts and where it's the best part of this entire run. And this is also what you might want to call a spec book. I've heard some influencers and people who own comic book shops and say, and they sell books and say there's really nothing in the Master of Kung Fu. But I disagree to a bit. I mean, Razor Fist has showed up actually in the Shang-Chi film, and this is his first appearance. Very minor key, but nonetheless still a key. And this begins that whole spy, espionage, kung fu sort of storyline. And it really is a storyline worth reading. So in issue #33, we're introduced to a character called Liko Wu, which again is I don't know that would be considered a minor key. I mean, she pretty much only has an effect in the Master of Kung Fu books, but I do believe that she would give the Black Widow a run for her money because she is, Liko Wu's a martial arts expert and she's an excellent spy. So I think she would fit in well with the Daughters of the Dragon if that was ever to be a case. Anyways, this is her first appearance, and she begins to have, the relationship starts between her and Shang-Chi, but there's also a third party involved, a guy by the name of Clive Reston, the one that looks a little bit like Sean Connery. He's sort of involved in this sort of triangle as well. It's not too overly dramatic. Sometimes it feels that way, but I don't think it is, because they concentrate more on the stories that are happening, involving the spies and what have you. So issue number 39, we introduced to a character called the Cat. And again, I don't consider that even a minor key. It just shows up pretty much for this. But I just want to show a couple of things about the artwork of Paul Gulacy in here. Is that, when he was talking about doing covers and he doesn't do any covers, he says sometimes, the splash page that I do, because he starts off many of his books with a splash page. He does this. This one's not the strongest one, but because there's another aspect in this book I want to show. So that would be like a splash page that Paul Gulacy would do for this particular book, and then it would continue on with the story. And he says, that's pretty much what I would have been, done for the cover at the time. That sort of duplicates for that. One of the things I like about his artwork is, there's a lot of things I like about Paul Gulacy's artwork. And the fact that I can't find this is, there we go. Okay, so he does action really well, and as I say, action in detail. Up here, what I like about this panel, especially up here, is that the background is stationary, but the characters move through it, and this is how he conveys movement. Not all the time, but this is one of the ways that he conveys movement. So I really like his approach to that, and it's done numerous times throughout the entire run. But he has details in his fighting and the characters, and it's very intricate work, and I really like the work of Paul Gulacy. And then in issue number 42, we're introduced, again, another minor character. This is what I would call a minor key, Shockwave, who is a martial arts expert who accents his ability with this electroshock sort of outfit. And again, wonderful artwork, a really interesting story here, a very espionage, very, very James Bond type of film at the time, with a lot of the kung fu elements added into it. Very interesting stories. And with issue number 44, we begin it's actually 8 issues long. There's this issue, which is the prologue, and issue number 51, which is the epilogue, and then there's the 6 issues in between. And there's many interesting things. One of the interesting things about those 6 issues is that they're taken from the point of view of a particular individual. Like issue number 45 would be sort of written by Shang-Chi, and then there's one written by Lei Wu, there's one written by Clive Reston. So the next 6 are sort of written by individuals, and from their point of view, what's happening in the story. And it's the grand story about Fu Manchu's ultimate plan to take over the world, and how he plans to do it, how he plans to eliminate 90% of the world's population and leave China standing alone and strong. And it's up to this espionage group, MI6, and Shang-Chi, Clive Reston, Blackjack Tor, Lei Wu, Agent Larner, to put an end to Fu Manchu. Follow, see his daughter shows up into this thing as well. So that there's all of the characters are sort of coming to an head to bring a conclusion, or to stop Fu Manchu once and for all. And it's, as I said, it's basically an 8-issue story, prologue, 6, epilogue. One of the characters introduced, no, he was actually introduced in issue number 48, and that would be Shaka Karn, which is an ancient warrior that is resurrected by Fu Manchu, and who Fu Manchu starts calling his son, but actually the ancient warrior is older than Fu Manchu. He shows up actually in issue 48. This is issue number 49, just so I can show you it on the cover. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think he's even a minor key. I just want to point out it was interesting. This whole storyline was very interesting. And then you have issue number 50, which is the end result, the final showdown between Shang-Chi and his father, Fu Manchu, and total exploration of the plan that Fu Manchu's and the repercussions from that. And then, as I say, issue 51, that no longer have Paul Gulacy artwork because that was the last one there in issue number 50, but he does provide the cover for 51, and the new artist moving forward by the name of Jim Craig has takes over the interior artwork, and this is just the epilogue to that story. And that's as far as I'm going to go as far as Master of Kung Fu today, and then we'll look at some of the other stuff later. So, is it worth a read? And yes, it's worth a read. All the way from the beginning to, even the earlier stuff when Doug Moench, as I say, took over with about issue number 20, and even his just the assassins are out to kill Shang-Chi. They're interesting books. His Eastern philosophy that he imposes, or not imposes, but has Shang-Chi speak. There's a couple of characters out there that, if they're written incorrectly, they can sound like they're delivering a sermon or they're preaching. Captain America is one, and I think Shang-Chi is another. But that doesn't happen here. Doug Moench captures the idea in his philosophy, and he puts it naturally. I mean, he just questions a lot of things, and he questions it in a different, view. He looks at the world, one of the early ones when he's, has nowhere to live, and he's living in a park, and he can't understand why, he's not causing anybody any problems, and he's not asking anything. Why can't I sleep in this park? It just, and again, put into the laws of different societies and how they react, and which ones are the strong laws and blah blah. He does, the Eastern philosophy is very effective in this by Doug Moench, and so I like that, and I like the way he develops all of the characters throughout the series. Blackjack Tar is somewhat of a bit of a racist when he is introduced, and the truth of the time is people were from the early 70s, they were. But he actually has a progressive development of character because he starts to recognize Shang-Chi as a person, not just as a figure. So there's a development even on that front. And then, of course, you've got all of the great artwork by Paul Gulacy. I just think it's amazing stuff. Top 10 illustrators, for me, Paul Gulacy is definitely in that list. So I can't complain. As I said, really love all of his artwork. Excellent series. The final story here, the Demon Seed or whatever it is from issues 44 to 51. That block, the best series of Master of Kung Fu, and I would say it is in one of the top storylines and stories of the 1970s period. So yes, definitely worth a read. As far as collecting is concerned, Paul Gulacy, there's the Man-Thing shows up way back in issue number 19. So you have those reasons to collect it. As far as spec and investment, the first issue, special Marvel edition number 15, I definitely think that's a good investment. I think it's at a low cost right now. I think it's something that may get some greater recognition as time goes on. I know there's a movie, but a very important character for the 1970s, and his first appearance just really is not all that expensive. As far as some of the other spec books and minor keys, the first appearance of Razor Fist, the first appearance of Shockwave, even Liko Wu would be considered like a somewhat of a spec book. The appearance of the Gil Kane covered one of Shang-Chi and Man-Thing is getting some traction just because it's such an interesting cover, and it's a good Gil Kane cover. So that would be one to keep an eye out for too. I will mention that you should look when you do get one of those books. Take a look inside to make sure it still has its Marvel value stamp, because I've bought a couple and I had to replace them because the Marvel value stamp was missing. So heads up on that one. As far as what is it going to cost you for this particular collection, for this particular run, this is the most expensive part of the run. Beyond here, a lot of the stuff will be found in the dollar bin. But prior to this, all of this earlier stuff, not so much. You're going to be looking anywhere from $5 to $20, and sometimes people will charge even more depending on the condition of the book. And that is a great deal to do with the age of the book, because most of this stuff that I've just showed you here is from the Bronze Age. And I also think that people are, noticing Paul Gulacy's artwork and how intricate and detailed and interesting it is. So for those reasons, whatever they could be the reasons, the book has started to pick up as far as the value of the book is concerned. Not cheap to buy, not expensive, but it's not a dollar bin material for the beginning. It's like $5 to $20 for these books that you're looking at here. Overall, yeah, when you get a chance, read Master of Kung Fu. It's not just a Kung Fu book. The espionage aspects that Doug Bench brings in, the philosophy, the artwork from Paul Gulacy, all good reasons to be reading this particular series, this particular block from issue number 15 to 51. All right, that's it. I've talked enough. So be, be good to yourself, be good to others. We'll talk again soon.